these were not just flights. They were leaps that went too far. 6 ordinary jumps that each started with calm skies and open air, but ended in chaos. One wrong move and one sudden shift was all it took. These are the 6 worst wingsuit incidents ever recorded. It was September 12, 2016, in Lauterbrunnen Valley, Switzerland. The valley is a narrow space with tall rock walls that go up about 2,600 feet above the grass fields. People who jump there often talk about wind that changes quickly when the day gets warmer. The walking paths to the jumping spots are steep, but many hikers and flyers use them. That week, a small group made plans to do a wingsuit flight from a place that many people know about. Among them was 29-year-old Daniel Buer, a mechanical engineer from Munich. At his job, he did things step by step and carefully. On weekends, he did activities that were hard and risky. He spent 2 years learning to skydive before he started using wingsuits. His friends said he was careful, but he liked to try harder things when he felt he was ready. He wrote down notes about checking his equipment, and he practiced how to hold his body. He used a medium-sized suit, not one made for racing, and he had a normal parachute system with a device that would open it automatically. The group that morning had 4 people. 2 came from Germany, 1 lived in Switzerland, and Daniel was the 4th person. They checked the wind at the place where they would land by using a small piece of cloth on a string. The bottom of the valley felt calm. They walked for about 2 hours up a path through trees to get to the jumping place. From the edge, the field below looked like a long strip with a river. The plan was easy. Jump off, fly across the rock face with enough space, move toward the river, and open their parachutes over the field. The group wanted to stay at least 150 feet away from the wall before turning toward the river. They decided who would go in what order. The local person would go first, then the 2 visitors, and Daniel would go last. The first 3 flights looked good to people watching from the ground. One flyer used a radio to say the air was a little thick and soft near the wall, but he could handle it. Daniel stood at the edge, checked his zippers and chest strap, and counted down. People on a walking path nearby saw him jump. His body position was good, and he moved faster quickly. A moment later, he started moving left, closer to the limestone rock. In that valley, morning air currents can turn into sudden crosswinds as the cliffs warm, creating dangerous turbulence close to the wall. One of the flyers below said later that he saw Daniel make a small change in direction, then get pushed again. The space between him and the wall got smaller fast. The suit touched rock. People in the field heard the ripping sound, like cloth tearing when pulled hard. A part of the left wing opened up, changing how air moved around his body. A tourist's video showed him shake, roll once, and drop more. There was no time to get back to a safe path. He struck the cliff hard halfway down, then tumbled onto the talus slope, a mix of broken limestone and loose rock at the base. 2 farmers ran toward the landing area, while another person called for emergency help. The other flyers flew in circles above and used radios to say that a jumper was hurt. A guide who saw what happened kept people away from the bottom of the cliff because rocks might fall. A rescue helicopter was dispatched within minutes, dropping paramedics who hiked the final stretch on foot. They checked for a heartbeat and started basic medical help, but there was no response. Mountain rescue teams set up a rope system to get to the exact place and make the area safe. The team made loose stones stable and wrote down details about the torn wing. The parachute stayed packed and closed. By early afternoon, they got the body and moved it to the valley floor to transport it. The police talked to people who saw it happen, including the farmers, the guide, and the 3 flyers. In the days after, Friends and co-workers in Munich found out what had happened. A funeral was held there the next week. Family, colleagues, and a few skydivers stood nearby as a short service was read. The ceremony was quiet, and they kept the details of the accident simple. Swiss authorities wrote a short notice to visiting flyers. They told everyone that the valley can make crosswinds near the wall, even when the field feels calm. Local groups shared information about wind and suggested staying farther away from the cliff on morning flights. A small memorial and a helmet sticker were put near the start of the trail. It was July 19th, 2017, in Chamonix, France. The mountain town has steep cliffs and sharp rock edges that bring climbers, hikers, and extreme sport flyers each summer. Wingsuit groups often use the higher edges above the valley, where jumping points are more than 3,000 feet above the forests. From those heights, the flight path goes over treetops before heading toward open slopes near the bottom. Weather that week was clear and warm, with calm winds in the morning. Among the visitors that week was Sophie Lauron, who was 26 years old and a nursing student from Lyon. She balanced her studies with a part-time job, saving money for months to pay for her first wingsuit trip to the Alps. Friends said she worked hard and stayed focused, someone who handled both school and work with discipline. She had some skydiving experience, but was new to wingsuits, and this was her first big attempt in a mountain setting. Sophie joined a small group of 4 flyers, 3 of whom had experience and had flown in Chamonix before. She was the least experienced among them, but the group agreed to let her try a jump while they watched her. Their plan was to launch from an edge that gave a clear view of the valley floor, with tall pine forests below. The idea was to glide across the forest and aim for a landing area where a parachute would be opened. At the edge, each flyer got ready one by one. People who saw it said Sophie stood at the edge longer than the others, waiting and unsure. An instructor in the group encouraged her, saying that conditions were stable and winds were calm. Tourists and hikers nearby watched them get ready. When Sophie finally jumped, her body position looked steady at first, and she gained some forward speed over the trees. Within seconds, however, she began to move lower than the planned path. The other flyers, watching from above, yelled for her to change her position. They later told officials that her glide angle was too shallow, trading speed for altitude. It left her flying low over the trees, with almost no margin for error. People on the ground remembered seeing her drop faster than the others, with her arms stretched out but not gaining height. She clipped the top of a pine, and the sudden impact spun her sideways. Branches snapped loudly as her suit tore, scattering needles and bark. From the slope below, hikers heard the sharp cracks as she crashed through the trees before finally striking a rocky slope at the forest's edge. 2 flyers flew in circles above, unable to help. People on the ground ran toward the crash site while others called for emergency help. A rescue helicopter dropped paramedics and mountain firefighters onto the slope within minutes, as Chamonix keeps trained crews ready for mountain accidents. They confirmed she had died when she hit the ground, and the area was made secure. The damaged suit was collected, and her parachute was still packed and never opened. Authorities wrote down details about the area and talked to the group she had flown with. News of the accident reached Lyon later that day. A funeral was held the following week, where classmates, instructors, and family came together. At her nursing school, candles were lit for her memory, and students shared quiet moments in her honor. The service was kept simple, with only a few words spoken by her relatives. After this happened, French authorities began looking at training requirements for beginner wingsuit flyers. Local groups also held safety meetings, asking instructors to set stricter limits on first-time mountain flights. The incident became one more reminder in the community that wingsuit flying, even under clear skies, allows little room for mistakes. It was May 23, 2015, in Yosemite National Park, California. The park was busy that spring, with tourists filling walking paths and campgrounds across the valley. Taft Point, a granite cliff that goes up more than 3,500 feet above the floor, was a popular spot for hikers and people taking pictures. By sunset, the edge was quiet except for a few campers below who looked up toward the ridge. Among the people in the park that evening was Mark Harrison, who was 34 years old and an outdoor guide from Colorado. He had spent years leading climbing trips and was known for his steady approach to dangerous work. Friends called him calm and reliable, with many seasons of rock climbing and base jumping behind him. Wingsuit flying was his newest activity. Yosemite had banned wingsuit and base jumps years before, but Mark and a partner had planned a secret flight at dusk, away from rangers and day visitors. They carried their equipment up to Taft Point, a cliff with wide views and straight drops. The edge had been used before by jumpers despite the ban, and rangers had given repeated warnings about the dangers. Fines and even jail time were possible for anyone caught, but some flyers still took the risk. Mark and his partner waited until the light was dim and hikers had left the trails. As the sun set, two small figures were seen by campers below. People who saw it later said they watched both men step off the edge, their wingsuits opening as they gained speed. The fall was fast and quiet at first, the suits carrying them out across the open air. For a moment, it looked smooth, but Mark's flight path began to move sideways. His direction brought him closer to the forested slopes that lined the valley. His partner, flying behind and slightly above, remembered hearing Mark yell something as he got close to the trees. The next second, the impact happened. Campers on the valley floor reported the sharp crack of a branch breaking, followed by an echo across the granite walls. Mark had hit a tree at high speed, and the strike forced him into a roll. His suit lost lift right away. People watching saw him fall downward without opening his parachute. Whether he tried or not could not be confirmed, but from the ground, the parachute stayed closed. He hit a boulder field at the base of the slope, and the noise carried across the valley. Campers yelled for help, while others called emergency services. Rangers responded within minutes, having been told by both witnesses and motion sensors in the area. They reached the base of the cliff after dark and made the area safe. Mark's partner had landed safely, but was quickly found and arrested. Rangers got the body before dawn, using headlamps and climbing equipment to guide the recovery team across uneven ground. By morning, word of the accident spread. Officials confirmed that a man had died in an illegal wingsuit jump from Taft Point. His partner faced charges for breaking park rules, including trespassing and unlawful base jumping. Rangers repeated long-standing warnings that Yosemite's cliffs, while dramatic and well-known in extreme sports, were not allowed for these activities because of repeated accidents. In Colorado, Mark's funeral was held the following week. Former clients from climbing trips came to share their stories, remembering the safe and steady way he had led them through mountains. The service was simple, with family and close friends present. His equipment was returned quietly, and no public statements were made by relatives. Park officials gave one final notice, reminding visitors that Yosemite's edges, while tempting for thrill seekers, had already claimed too many lives from illegal flights. They said that enforcement would continue, and that risks in the park's vertical terrain left little room for mistakes. It was December 10th, 2017, in Cape Town, South Africa. In the Southern Hemisphere, December marks the start of summer, and warm weather has settled over the city. The slopes of Table Mountain were filled with hikers and tourists. The flat top rose nearly 3,500 feet above the city, with straight walls that made it both a natural landmark and a challenge for extreme sports. Among them was Tabo Mooena, a 31-year-old IT worker living in Cape Town. He grew up near Table Mountain and often hiked its trails since he was young. Recently, he had saved enough money to buy used wingsuit equipment and joined a local group of flyers. Friends said he was proud to be able to fly over the same mountain he had walked so many times. For this jump, he carried a standard parachute setup and wore a mid-range suit made for beginners. That afternoon, a crowd of tourists had gathered at the lower trails and viewing spots. From the base, the sharp, straight faces of the mountain gave a clear view of flyers launching from above. The group took turns, with 2 jumpers leaving the edge before Tabo. People who saw it said his launch looked stable. He spread his suit and gained speed as he glided forward, holding a straight line over the edge of the flat top. Within seconds, however, the winds began to change. In Cape Town's summer, strong gusts known locally as the Cape Doctor can shift without warning, spilling over the flat top of Table Mountain and pushing flyers sideways. Several people watching below noticed him move closer to the wall. His wingsuit tilted slightly, and his space from the rock got smaller. The next moment, the impact came. People watching described a loud thud as Tabo hit the cliff face. Pieces of fabric and gear broke away, falling toward the lower slopes. The sound of the collision carried across the viewing areas, and the flight line went quiet. The other flyers flew in circles above, but could do nothing to help. Tourists below began calling emergency services. Park rangers at the base of the mountain were told within minutes and started organizing a response. Due to the height and position of the body, rescuers had to climb the cliff to reach the spot. Rope teams were sent from above, and progress was slow. By evening, they reached Tabo and made him secure. The body was lowered in stages and moved to a recovery point near the trailhead. Authorities closed the launch site for several days following the incident. Flyers were warned to study seasonal wind charts more carefully, especially in December, when gusts are at their strongest. Local groups also passed around safety notes, reminding members that Table Mountain's walls left little room for mistakes once the air changed. In Cape Town, Tabo's funeral took place later that week. His co-workers, family, and friends gathered for a short service. Some members of his wingsuit group came, and a few of them left flowers near one of the mountain trails in his memory. The incident was noted in local papers as one more reminder of how dangerous wingsuit flights can be in South Africa's summer winds. For the authorities, it became part of a pattern of warnings that cliffs and flat tops, while scenic, are harsh to flyers who misjudge their conditions. It was August 18, 2018, in the Dolomites of northern Italy. The rough limestone peaks stood out under clear summer skies, bringing climbers, hikers, and tourists to the valleys below. That day, the air was dry, and you could see for miles across the ridges. Above Cortina d'Ampezzo, a small group of wingsuit flyers got ready for a jump from one of the well-known ridges, where cliffs went up thousands of feet above the trails. Among the group was Elena Bianke, a 27-year-old art teacher from Verona. She had always been drawn to the mountains, often painting the Dolomites in her free time. Wanting to experience them in a new way, she turned to skydiving, training for several years before joining a small wingsuit club. Friends said she was gentle in nature, but willing to try new challenges. She had flown several times before, but each flight carried risks, especially in terrain as harsh as the Dolomites. The jump site was a ridge that looked over sharp rock towers and open valleys. Flyers often used it in late summer when skies were calm and stable. The group had 3 members that afternoon. Elena was second in the order, standing on the narrow edge as she fixed her suit and helmet. Her parachute was checked, and she zipped the suit arms closed before stepping toward the edge. Hikers on the trails below saw the group and stopped to watch from a distance. The first flyer launched smoothly, turning left into the open air. His path carried him toward the valley floor. When it was Elena's turn, she waited for a few seconds, then leaned forward and dropped into her flight. People who saw it said her body position looked steady as she cleared the cliff. Her wingsuit filled with air, and she picked up speed across the face of the ridge. For the first stretch, her line looked controlled. She gained forward distance and appeared to move well above the trees. But halfway down the slope, her path shifted. A slight change in body angle or a pocket of crosswind sent her drifting toward the sharp rock towers on one side of the valley. 2 climbers scaling a nearby route noticed her coming closer. They later told officials that she seemed to tilt slightly left, making her space smaller. Within seconds, the distance closed too far. The people watching heard a sharp impact as Elena hit a ledge. Her helmet broke loose and bounced against the limestone, falling down the slope. The sound carried through the valley as the climbers yelled in shock. The rest of her group flew in circles above, unable to change what happened. One flyer called emergency services, while the other continued to circle to keep watching. Hikers from the lower trails pointed toward the crash site as rescuers were sent out. A helicopter took off from a nearby base, heading straight for the ridge. The rescue team arrived quickly, hovering near the rock towers. A crew member was lowered by cable to the ledge. They confirmed right away that Elena had died on impact. Her wingsuit and parachute system were scattered in pieces across the slope, and parts of her helmet lay far below. The site was photographed and written down before recovery began. The body was lifted by stretcher into the helicopter and flown down to Cortina, while ground teams collected the remaining equipment. News of the accident spread through local climbing and flying groups. The Dolomites had seen other incidents in past years, and officials again called attention to the risks of civilian jumps in such narrow terrain. Italian authorities announced a review of wingsuit regulations, especially for non-professional flyers using popular ridges. In Verona, Elena's funeral was held several days later. Her family, friends, and colleagues came, along with many of her students. The service was quiet, and the children she taught brought drawings and paintings to place at her grave. Some showed the same mountains she had loved to paint, now remembered in her honor. The Dolomites stayed open to climbers, hikers, and tourists, but wingsuit groups faced closer watching. Local guides and officials asked visiting flyers to respect safety limits and think about the terrain carefully before planning jumps. In the weeks that followed, talks about restrictions grew, with some arguing that the sharp towers and close walls of the Dolomites left little room for mistakes. It was October 15, 2016, in Mount Cook National Park, New Zealand. In the southern hemisphere, October meant spring, and weather in the high peaks changed without warning. Mount Cook, also called Aoraki, went up to more than 12,000 feet, its upper ridges covered in snow and ice. Sharp rock areas split the mountain, and wind poured down the valleys. Climbers often trained there, but for wingsuit flyers, the terrain was known as some of the most hard to predict in the world. Among those trying a jump that day was Ryan Brown, who was 32 years old and a carpenter from Auckland. He was known by friends for long hikes and climbing trips in New Zealand's national parks. After 3 years of skydiving practice, he turned to wingsuits, training with 2 companions from a local club. They planned their first attempt over Mount Cook together, choosing a ridge with open airspace above a snowfield. The 3 set off early, climbing to an edge high above the valley. Below them, a guided walking group was moving along the Hooker Valley track, a popular route with views of the glacier and surrounding ridges. The sky was partly clear, but winds changed in bursts, sweeping clouds across the summit. Guides later said they noticed gusts stronger than usual for the season. The first flyer launched cleanly and turned away into the valley. Ryan stepped forward next. People watching on the Hooker Valley track below said he looked steady as his suit opened and carried him past the ridge. At first, his line seemed safe, gliding straight out over the wide snowfield. Moments later, the wind changed. Spring gusts spun off the glacier, pulling him sideways toward rough alpine terrain. Instead of hitting bare rock, Ryan hit the edge of a snow ridge. The impact tore his suit and forced him into a slide. He tumbled across the slope, leaving a long trail in the snow as chunks of ice broke loose around him. Guides on the trail yelled for their groups to stay back as they saw him roll hundreds of feet down the white slope. He came to a stop near the edge of a shallow crack in the ice, with equipment scattered across the snowfield. Some hikers screamed, while others tried to point rescuers to his location. The other 2 flyers flew in circles above, but the changing winds made it too dangerous to try any kind of landing near him. One landed safely lower in the valley, while the other continued to mark the site for rescuers. By afternoon, a rescue helicopter from the Alpine base took off. Strong winds forced the pilot to hover at a distance, while 2 rescuers were lowered by cable onto the snow. They made their way across the slope on metal spikes for their boots, confirming that Ryan had died right away. His gear was collected where possible, but much of it was buried in the snow. The recovery took hours, with the helicopter making several passes before lifting his body out. The 2 companions who had jumped with him were flown out separately and later treated for shock. Rangers spoke with them about the wind conditions and the decision to fly over the glacier in spring. News of the accident reached Auckland later that day. His funeral was held the following week, small and quiet, with family and close friends attending. The service was private, and no public statements were made. In the time after, New Zealand officials released a notice through the Department of Conservation. They warned that alpine winds around Mount Cook changed too quickly to be predicted, even on days that looked stable. Local climbing guides repeated the warning, saying the glacier valleys created sudden wind flows that left flyers little room to recover. For wingsuit groups, the message was clear. Mount Cook's ridges and snowfields carried risks that no amount of preparation could fully control. Thanks for watching. But remember, every climb, every jump, carries its own cost. The next story is waiting on the end screen. Click it if you're ready to witness another final ascent.